Awesome. So we're going to do quickly just who the team is here. We have a few members on our team. Myself, Kyla, so I'm the clinic owner and also registered social worker. We have Samantha, Ashley, Brittany, Amanda, Darcy, Sarah, Megan. I'm not going to go through all of them right now, but just keep going. Yeah. And then we have Kelsey, who will introduce herself after. And then we also have Sarah Delaroche, and then we have Karina, Ashley, and then Caitlin. So Ashley and Caitlin are both joining us in January, and they will be building their practice here at Wellness Within. You want to go to the next slide?
And that's
Okay.
me. So,
Yeah.
like Kyla said, I'm Kelsey, one of the psychotherapists here qualifying. And I do specialize and do a lot of work with grief and with those who are grieving. I also do a lot of work with trauma and offer EMDR. So, those are kind of my main things that I do like to offer. So, first, we're going to talk a little bit about sort of grief in general, do a little bit of psychoeducation about grief. So, grief is our natural response to loss, and mourning is the process through which we adapt to that loss. So, how we are expressing and navigating that pain that we feel, right? And I think many of us think of grief as the loss of somebody or a death, right? But it can be triggered by any significant loss. I often say to my clients, wherever there is a change, there is loss. Wherever there is loss, there is grief. So this can be the obvious things of the loss of a person or a pet, or the loss of a job, loss of a relationship, loss of something that we really wanted or desired, like maybe starting a family, loss of changes in our body's abilities. So maybe an illness or a sickness, right? That can also bring up anticipatory grief. So lots of different kinds of grief, lots of different kinds of loss. And yeah, loss without death is what sort of refer to as those intangible losses. And they might not be as clear or as evident to other people, but it is still a type of loss, and it is still a type of grief, right? And sometimes we feel that even more pervasively than the more kind of evident losses, like losing a person. So and I think it's important to highlight this too, because a lot of those losses go very much hand in hand. And this is what we talk about in our next slide here. So primary versus secondary losses. So these are terms used to distinguish between the direct and indirect impacts of grief. So our primary loss is that core or direct loss. It's that thing, that person or situation that is now just fundamentally gone. And the secondary losses are more like the ripple effects of that primary loss. So they're often more subtle. They could be very unexpected, but very much so indirect. So we've already sort of talked about some examples, but some examples of the secondary loss could be a loss of a sense of security or stability, maybe loss of financial stability, a loss of identity or a role. Like, for example, if you've been a caretaker for someone for many years and then all of a sudden that role is gone. Also, losing a daily routine or activities that were once part of your life is a huge secondary loss. And another big one is a loss of future hopes or plans, right? Maybe we're not being able to grow old with a partner that we thought we would, or maybe we're not going to be able to see our parent become a grandparent when we start to have kids. So things like that. It's all the ripple effects, right? And it is important to highlight these two because it helps us realize that grief isn't just about the initial loss, right? It's about so much more than that. And in many cases, the griever might not fully recognize that secondary loss, especially not right away, right? They might not come up until, weeks or months or even years later that we might kind of experience them. So then we often don't get that same level of support and understanding because it's not as evident to other people, right? So that's why grief can also feel really overwhelming, right? It's about not just the loss directly, but everything that has shifted as a result of it. So I think, it goes without saying that our grief can be very nonlinear, right? It is not predictable. It does not follow a straight path, and that can be really frustrating and confusing, right? But grief often does come in waves, right? We're oscillating between maybe one day we're feeling really good, we feel like we're managing things, right? And then the next day or the next moment, we might be completely overwhelmed by sadness or anger or guilt, right? So it's that oscillation. The oscillation of grief is also about finding a balance between feeling the pain of the loss and finding ways to keep on living your life, right? And it's important to remember that everyone's grief journey looks different. And I'm sure that is something that you have heard before, right? There's no right or wrong way to experience it. It is not a linear process. There's no clear endpoint. It's rather just, a series of emotional ebbs and flows, right? But each one does contribute to your healing in its own way. So another important thing to highlight is the internal and external adjustments that come with grief. So those internal adjustments, not only are we having to accept the reality of the loss and finding new ways to understand ourselves and our world now. So it's very much about reconstructing our identity. There's so much of an identity loss with grief that can occur. And then those external adjustments, that involves our changes to our daily lives and routines. So we might have to adapt to a new living situation or a new financial situation, right? We need to create maybe new routines, maybe establishing a new social network, change in responsibilities. So all those external things that we now need to adjust to as well. And there also can be spiritual adjustments. We might experience a shift in our beliefs or our values or a sense of meaning, right? So that can also be another important part of the grieving process, right? So this I just want to touch on briefly, but I do think that it is really important to touch on. I think this kind of helps normalize all the symptoms and things that we might experience that comes along with grief that sometimes people don't sort of recognize as that, but it can sort of normalize that for people. So there's 3 brain regions that I am going to bring some attention to. So the first one is our prefrontal cortex. So this is our thinking brain. It's responsible for our decision making, our problem solving, our rational thought. So in grief, this part of our brain actually becomes very underactive. So it can be harder to think clearly, to make decisions. We might feel mentally foggy. We might feel very overwhelmed by everyday tasks, right? Similarly, the anterior cingulate cortex, this is our emotional regulatory center. It also becomes underactive. So when it's working properly, it helps to regulate our emotions. It allows us to manage our feelings and respond appropriately to stress. But when it's underactive, it makes it more challenging to process emotion in a more balanced way. We have difficulty regulating our emotions, and it can feel like a lot of emotional instability. And then the third brain region is our amygdala, and this is our fear center, or kind of like our brain's smoke alarm. So this area of our brain is responsible for detecting threat, and it turns on our fight or flight response. So when we do grieve, the amygdala actually becomes overactive. So we might become very hypervigilant. We might feel like we're kind of on high alert. We're more prone to anxiety and fear and maybe even panic. And then small triggers, like emotional triggers, like maybe a song or a place or some sort of a reminder, can create very intense emotional reactions because our amygdala is actually perceiving these things as a threat. And these are a lot of brain changes that we see when someone encounters trauma, right? Also important to note that our brain does really heavily rely on predictability, right? Our brain loves that. Predictability helps us feel really safe and grounded, and grief really disrupts that predictability. Our brains are really struggling to process the loss in a context where predictability is very much lost. So lots of manifestations that can come along with grief too, right? I think people think it is just an emotional response, but there's so much more to it. It's psychological, it's behavioral, it's social, it's physical. And again, this can help us by highlighting this and talking about it. It helps to normalize the experiences and remind us that grief does affect the whole person and so much more than just that emotional part of it. So some psychological effects, sadness and depression, right? Denial, maybe guilt or regret, maybe anger, anxiety, maybe even numbness or detachment, a preoccupation with the loss, and behavioral manifestations of grief, right? It might find ourselves withdrawing or isolating. Maybe we're avoiding. Maybe we're engaging in risky or self destructive behavior. Maybe we're overworking and trying to keep busy. And grief also impacts our social life and our social relationships. We might find we have strained relationships now. Maybe we have difficulty communicating. Maybe we are avoiding social situations. Maybe we even have an increased dependence on certain relationships. And then, of course, there are so many physical manifestations of grief as well: fatigue and low energy, sleep disturbances, appetite changes, a weakened immune system, and physical pain. So, yes.
So, Kelsey, I just want to
Yeah.
hop in there for a second and just say, like, what we often hear in session is like life just continues on after grief. And that's something that I hear a lot, but I don't think that people really understand all the complexities to grief that you've just shared, right? So, that's why it feels so uncomfortable that life just goes on because in our brain, in our body, in our social settings, everywhere, it's not just the same. There's so much that's changing when we experience grief. And so that can explain kind of why we feel that disruption.
hmm Yeah, that's yeah, why grief can feel so overwhelming, right?
Yeah.
And so prolonged. Yeah, so thank you. Please hop in whenever.
Yeah, we had someone in the chat also just say like
Okay.
that they also felt that way. Like they've been saying that
Um,
1,000 times since they've experienced their loss. And so that's, yeah, I'm glad that I said that because I feel like we hear it a lot. And look at the complexities of grief. It's not
mm,
just losing someone, there's so much more to it. Um,
mm.
so if you take away only one thing from today, that's one of the things.
The complexity of it. Yeah. And why I do like to talk about those secondary losses, because I think that gets overlooked too, right? Especially by like witnesses, people that aren't experiencing the grief
Yeah.
themselves, right? Like that grief comes up so often down the road. Like it's sort of this never ending
Yeah.
um, process. Um, okay, so let's keep going. So now we're kind of getting more into why holidays sort of intensify that grief, and also kind of more tangible ways for you to kind of navigate your way through the holidays if you are experiencing grief. So obviously, holidays can be very hard for anyone who is grieving, right? I think that goes without saying. We might encounter heightened cultural pressures to be joyful and sort of those really strong societal expectations, right? And this pressure can feel very overwhelming. And we might feel like it's really difficult to live up to these expectations. And it becomes easy to feel like we're sort of doing it wrong, like we're doing the holidays wrong, or that our grief doesn't belong in this season, right? And we don't want to bring other people down. So there's this pressure for us to kind of be joyful and act like everything's okay and that we're doing great. Traditions also act as huge emotional triggers. Um, they bring up memories, of happier times or of a person, and it really highlights the absence of someone or something. They're very painful reminders. Empty chairs or absence roles, so the physical absence of a person at the table, or the emotional vacancy of someone who used to play a really big role in the family gatherings. And also the increased social comparison. With social media, we're often seeing people posting their pictures and videos of them having a great time and with all their friends and family. And that can lead to that heightened social comparison and create feelings of isolation and sadness and emptiness, right? And kind of the feeling of missing out, or we're comparing our experiences, our grieving experiences, to other people's celebrations. And that can really intensify that sense of loss. And then again, like the holidays, it can really amplify those secondary losses that maybe we hadn't really come across yet. That ripple effect hadn't really reached us yet until we encounter a holiday. And then those secondary losses can feel really real. And again, all of these stressors can take a toll on our emotional well being, our physical well being, and our mental well being, right? And I've listed a few symptoms there that we've sort of talked about already, but fatigue, low energy, that brain fog, disrupted sleep, difficulty concentrating, all of those things, all of those manifestations.
Okay, so now we're just going to take a moment because so far we've learned a lot about grief thanks to Kelsey. And it's likely that as Kelsey was talking about all of these different components to grief, that we've been reflecting about our own experiences, about the information that we're hearing and how it applies to us, how we are differing or similar. And so it's a normal time to reflect on all of this, especially because if you're being brought to this webinar, it's because you've experienced grief and that you're navigating it over the holidays. So let's take some time to actually just reflect. Whether you are grabbing a pen and paper, you're opening up Word on your computer, or using a notepad on your phone, or even just taking a moment to just answer these questions in your head. Just take a deep breath, read through these questions, jot down what comes to mind. So, what moments or dates feel the heaviest right now, or that you may be anticipating coming up? Just take some moments to think about that. And then I'll say, like, what expectations am I carrying? So, in alignment with all the extras that Kelsey had said, change, what expectations are now are we carrying going into the holidays? Or even with this natural reflection of a new year, right? So the end of 2025 and the new 2026, if we're experiencing grief around this time, we can also have that trickle into the reflections of what does the next year bring? What am I carrying? And then the next one is, what do I need? So I want you to consider emotional, physical, relational needs, not just one area, but all of them. I think that's a really important piece to look at. So maybe we're needing connection, maybe we're needing rest, maybe we're needing some boundaries for ourselves, some boundaries to implement to others. Maybe we need to change up those traditions and switch up what's expected of us that way. And maybe we just need to give ourselves some space, whether it be emotionally, physically, giving ourselves that space can be really helpful as well. So if you feel your grief starting to kind of take over, please feel welcome to like feel comfortable giving that a little bit of space if you can. You don't need to let it take over if you don't want to. If it is taking over, that's also okay because that's what happens sometimes. But give yourself some space to just exist with your grief here today. And there's absolutely no pressure, but if anybody does want to share any of the things that are coming up for them, they're welcome to. I'll leave about a minute here or so, just if anybody wants to unmute and chat or leave some notes in the chat, you're welcome to. I would also encourage you to think about these questions as the days leading up to the holiday get closer. And then also throughout the holidays too. Keep checking in, like what's feeling hard right now and heavy, and what expectations are you carrying, and what do you need? So we did I had to set a timer and here it's going off. Because otherwise I wouldn't know how long that is. We did have someone share, so I'm just going to share what one of our participants said. So it's been an issue for many years, but I feel as though this year is harder as I navigate the loss of a parental relationship due to boundaries I am trying to set. Boundaries, yes. Okay. As well as the death of a loved one amongst that. So sometimes when we experience grief, it sounds like we also have to set boundaries with others in our life too, which is challenging. Yeah. multiple layers of grief. Thank you for sharing that. We're echoing that. Another participant said, I lost my father, and this is my second Christmas. And that combined with being single is difficult. Yeah. Navigating that on our own, it feels like. Yeah. Yeah. So asking yourself what you might need during that. So it sounds like we needed boundaries. We might need some connection. Maybe we need some space. Yeah. All of that's really helpful. Thank you for sharing. I really appreciate that.
Mhm. I
Yeah.
also, if it's okay to jump in for a second and just kind of highlight how normal that can be as you're going through sort of that second year of hitting those big holidays and the milestones, and how that can almost feel harder than that first year, right? Because that first year we're very much in survival mode and we're just trying to get through it. And then that second year it can feel a lot heavier. So that is can be a very normal experience.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're ready to get on to the next slide now.
Okay. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about some coping skills and some strategies that you can bring with you. So, as Kyla said, as we were kind of reflecting there, allowing kind of whatever you're experiencing to happen if you feel like you're able to do that. So, and that is important, right? If you feel like you are in a space or have that capacity to be able to sit with the emotion when it comes up, right? And maybe just letting that wave of grief hit you, right? Like if you're in a safe space and again, like you feel like you have that capacity, can you just let it hit you, right? Maybe lay down on the floor and just let it overcome you, right? Knowing that it will pass. And then maybe once it does, we get up, we get a glass of water, right? Sometimes we can try doing that and just letting or allowing that emotion to come. But sometimes it can feel like that is too much and that could be way too overwhelming. And the fear is often that if we sort of let that wave come or we let ourselves fully feel our grief, that it's never going to end. So, one way to kind of ease into this process of grieving without really just diving into it completely is something that I do with my clients called minimum effective dosing. And this just involves allowing yourself really small, controlled moments to sit with your grief. So it might be 30 seconds or a minute or 5 minutes, whatever kind of feels best for you, and use a timer if that helps. And just allow yourself to feel the grief and whatever emotion comes up, right? That might come up as sadness, it might come up as anger, it might come up with some regrets, but just allowing whatever shows up to be there and not judge it and just allow it. So this can really help our nervous system recognize that it is safe for us to begin experiencing these emotions and that we can sort of tiptoe into that again, like not diving into it. But yeah, just letting us know that it is safe for us to experience that, right? Another thing, and I know Kyla uses this metaphor with grief, is like a weather metaphor, and I love this one to sort of use this as a self check-in, right? Sometimes our grief days can look very dark and stormy. Sometimes there's an emotional downpour. Sometimes our days just might be cloudy. Maybe some days the sun is peeking through, right? So I like to use this one to check in with my clients too. Like, what does grief look like for you today? And just kind of sit with that. I think it's also important to note with the clouds and the sun peeking through, right? That joy and grief can certainly coexist, right? And, I think it's something that we often talk about in therapy is the duality of emotions and saying, that two things can be true, right? And I think when we do experience emotions like grief and joy at the same time, it can feel very confusing and maybe unsettling, and maybe there's guilt that comes up with that too, but it is very normal, and those emotions are all valid. Okay, so let's talk about some boundaries and managing our expectations. So again, with that weather metaphor, checking in with yourself, right? What is my capacity for today? What are my energy levels like? How much energy can I afford to give out and how much will be left, right? So using that weather metaphor can be helpful for that. And then do we need to establish some boundaries for ourselves to protect that energy? And the need for boundaries, especially around the holidays, is very normal and can be very beneficial. So some examples of boundaries that we might need to set is maybe leaving events early, right? Maybe we're opting out of events entirely. Maybe we are choosing some smaller gatherings this year. Maybe we are changing traditions or putting a pause on them. Maybe we're finding new ways to create traditions. You might, it is very normal, right, for what your energy levels were or what your capacity was, in previous years. It's going to look really different this year, and that's okay, right? You might find you need more rest. You might need more quiet time. You might need less social interaction than you're used to, and that is okay. So here's some potential scripts that you can use. And you can take a picture of this or write them down. It's really helpful to have sort of these scripts in mind before going into situations, right? So thank you for inviting me. I may need to leave early depending on how I'm feeling, or I'm choosing a quieter holiday this year, or I might decide last minute based on how I'm feeling. I really like that one. Or I appreciate your care, but I just need some quiet time today, right? Just really simple, respectful language. It can help us honor our needs without feeling guilty. And then also managing our internal expectations. So releasing that expectation and the pressure to be festive, right? Release that expectation to smile, to act like everything's okay, to participate in all the traditions and celebrate, because that might feel way out of sync with where you are at emotionally. And also giving yourself permission to change your mind, right? Grief is very unpredictable. So if we say yes and commit to something a few days prior, and then that day comes, we might be in a whole different emotional state. And it is okay for you to have to change your mind, right? Honor that shift without feeling guilty. And here are some scripts for that. So I thought I had the energy for this when I said yes, but grief is really hitting me differently today. And I'm just going to take a step back. Or when I agreed, I was having a better moment. Today is a little bit harder and I just need to rest. And I hope that's okay. Or I need to change my plans. My grief is it's heavier today than I expected. Thank you for giving me that space. So those are all great scripts to bring in.
So we had a question come through, Kelsey, and I'm actually just curious how you would approach it.
Okay.
So one of our participants said, I think sometimes I struggle with the reason I need to leave when I'm feeling tapped out. So
Mm,
I often feel I need to come with an excuse or even a lie to tell people in order to leave. So preparing, and I'm sure you've heard this a lot. I know I do as well, but like preparing before you even get there, the
mhm.
excuse or the lie in order to get ourselves out. Um, when I hear this, I think about like worrying about other people more than worrying about ourselves, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Mhm.
but it's my partner is understanding of this, but I feel as though other people may not understand. Any tips if people try to challenge you once you've said one of those lines? How would you
That's a good
approach
one.
that?
That is a hard one.
Yeah.
Um, I think find if you can, if you're able to, have sort of a safety person with you in that decision, or sort of an anchor of support that can sort of anchor you in that decision, that can help you in that. And I realize that's not everybody's situation. But yeah, I think it sort of does come down to, am I trying to please these people or am I doing this for myself, right? Like identifying, is this for me and my values, or is this kind of those societal expectations and those values? So maybe even having that conversation with yourself a little bit, right? Going into that, if you are sort of anticipating some pushback, and also just realizing that, I am doing this for me. This is self protection. This is self kindness. And this is what I might need these holidays, and that I realize that's easier said than done. I don't know if you have anything else to add, Kyla, but
Yeah, no, I think what you said about the needs, that's where I was going to go. So I would even just try to have a grounding moment before you enter those situations instead of feeling like you need to go equipped with a lie about it or an excuse. Maybe go in with a boundary or a script that we talked about before, because it sounds like maybe our need in that moment is a boundary or is space or is some autonomy to make a choice for us. And everybody grieves differently. So just because maybe our I'm going to use like maybe our mom is liking to grieve with people, but then maybe we want to grieve without others around. Like that is okay. We all grieve differently. And so when we're able to communicate our needs there and feel confident in that, setting that boundary, we also are honoring our needs while not putting others' needs down, but still giving space to theirs and just recognizing the differences. So I would say like it's really like the scripts are kind of a spin-off of instead of having it like a lie or an excuse, here's a script where you're able to like confidently say what's important to you and what
Mhm.
you're needing. Does that make sense for you, Kelsey, as well?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think too, like one of the scripts, right? The one about like, thank you for inviting me, but I might need to leave early. So when you're going in, establishing that boundary kind of like from the get-go. So
Mhm.
then when you feel like, okay, I'm tapped out, it is time for me to go, then, you don't feel like you have to spring it on the person, or like hopefully they've had some time to kind of get on board with that. Right. So maybe
Yeah.
even like going in with that and starting with that, right. And setting that boundary right away. That might make it a little bit easier.
Yeah. There's
Yeah.
this false sense that at Christmas time or holiday time, we need to be all together as a family, right?
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes that's actually not helpful for some people, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Especially when our family comes with complexities, right? So, I think when we're worried other people are going to respond with, well, no, you want to be here with our family. I think sometimes we have to just remind ourselves what we need, right? So that person in our life might want us to be there, but we also have to take care of ourselves. Yeah. And that's a hard thing to do when we're navigating grief. So hopefully, I know that didn't really answer your question specifically, but I hope that that gives you some things to think about. Okay. Okay, so the next part of continuing bonds, which actually kind of connects to this. So grief isn't about letting go of the person, but it's rather finding a new way to stay connected. And continuing bonds might show up through memories, values, traditions, or inner conversations as well. Maintaining this connection can bring comfort, sadness, or both, and all are valid. So this is actually one of my favorite parts of talking about grief in sessions. And I always have to be mindful that the parts where Kelsey's been talking about all the changes to grief, I don't always use in my practice as much as I maybe should, but then I always like to do this part. And this is the part that I like because it's about finding a way to create new experiences and new relationships with the person who's gone. Um, it's almost like we can make sure that they still feel close even when they're not there. And I always find the creativity that comes out in this part in sessions or even just within my family and my friends who have experienced grief is always my favorite part of navigating grief. Can you go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So, with many rituals, so holidays often intensify grief due to the memories, expectations, and sensory reminders, as we've talked about. So many rituals provide a structure during overwhelming moments. They offer choice and control in a season that can feel really pressured, and they allow grief to be acknowledged rather than suppressed. And it doesn't have to feel as consuming as we anticipate grief to be at times. And examples could be things like lighting a candle, so it can be done privately or with others. So it represents remembrance, love, and ongoing presence. I know this is one that our family does quite a bit. And then honoring a memory, so sharing a story at the table, writing a letter or journaling, writing Christmas cards, which I actually have heard quite a bit in session lately, or creating a small memory object, so a photo frame or an ornament, something that we can feel that that person's still living in our memory and in our space with us. Donating so often to a cause connected to the person's values, or volunteering or performing a random act of kindness in their name, as it helps us feel like we're transforming our grief into a meaning without minimizing the loss. So we see this a lot when we see like the traditional, instead of bringing flowers, donate to this cause. So when we see like obituaries or celebration of lives. And then tradition. So keeping part of a tradition while changing another part. So giving permission to skip traditions that feel too painful and trying something new can reduce pressure while still honoring that season. And I actually just had this conversation with one of my clients the other day, and it was actually she was navigating a separation, and this is the first Christmas that she'll be with her children without her partner, now ex-partner, and just we talked about how we can actually look at this as grief, but also opportunities, and what do we want to keep, and what do we want to get rid of, and what do we want these new traditions to look like at this time. So there's no right or way to grieve over the holidays. Choose what feels supportive this year, and maybe next year it will be different, right? So revisit and revise rituals each year. Just remember to balance your remembrance with rest and boundaries at the same time, right? So maybe this new tradition feels good today, or keeping this tradition feels good this year, but not next year. And remind yourself that rituals don't remove grief, but they give it a place to land. And I think that's why that's one of my favorite parts of navigating grief is just finding that place for it to land in that, if we're thinking about like the 5 stages of grief, that acceptance component is a part of finding that meaning in the right now. And I think that can be some of the most beautiful parts of navigating grief. Okay, next one. Okay, so we're going to do another little guided check-in. And this one is going to be a little bit more of like a body scan. And I want everyone to participate as much as they can here. I know everyone is coming at different spaces today, so I'm understanding that even if you're just listening along. So I want to know kind of where is my grief today in my body? Where in my body am I feeling this grief? Okay, so I'd like to invite us all to just close our eyes. And if that feels comfortable, or soften your gaze, take a slow breath in and a gentle breath out. Let your attention move down into your body. Notice your feet on the floor, supported, being held. There's no need to change anything. We're just noticing today, without judgment, without criticism, just bringing awareness. Now I want you to bring your awareness to your legs, to your hips, and moving up to our stomach. Notice if there's any tightness, heaviness, tension, uneasiness. Simply acknowledge it. There's no right way or right space to feel this. But notice that this is where my body is holding things today. Move your attention to your chest and your shoulders. You might feel openness or pressure, warmth, tension, or even nothing at all. Just know whatever is here is also okay. No judgment, no need to change it. Just acknowledge it. So if it feels right, take one slow breath into this area, whether it be in your hips, your legs, your stomach, your chest. Breathing in, allowing your breath to move through this area, creating just a little space around whatever sensation is present. And as you exhale, imagine a softening coming with that. We're not forcing it. We're just allowing even a 5% release. Keep breathing into that area. Keep being present. and softening with that exhale. Now, I want you also to bring your awareness to your hands, your jaw, maybe even your eyes. Let them relax just a touch. We often don't realize how much we hold in those spaces. Now take one more slow breath in and a gentle breath out. When you're ready, I'd like you to return your attention to the room, the space around you, feeling your feet, your seat, and the support beneath you. When you feel ready, open your eyes, move your body as you feel you need to bring yourself back to the moment. You've just taken a brief moment to meet your body in grief and with kindness. Just a brief moment is sometimes all it takes to just reconnect with ourselves and ground ourselves in the chaos of the holidays. Just breathing into those parts of our body can really bring that awareness to us when we are not paying attention to it. When there's all these to-dos or traditions or expectations on us, taking that moment to just find out where we felt that in our body. So can I ask, where do we feel this came up for us? So if you're comfortable sharing, if you notice there was a part of your body that was holding or storing some of that grief. Okay, so we heard in our chest. Yeah, yeah. Karina on our team would be able to explain this much better than I am able to, but I can say that often there's a lot of connection between our breathing and grief. So the way that our chest can be storing or have those chakra blocks can also be connected to our grief. Again, Karina on our team, our Reiki master, would explain this so much better. But I just know every time that I've went to go see Reiki, that is usually a thing that we notice, right? So my breathing will get more shallow. I will feel heaviness in my chest. And when we are releasing it, we notice it's a lot of grief that's been stored. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. Okay. I think we're ready to move to the next one. Okay. So that's me again. All right. So now that we've had a moment to check in and we're coming to the end of our webinar here shortly, I wanted to ask again everyone to return to their pen, paper, notepad, Word document, mind, whatever you feel called to for just a short minute here. I want you to reflect on the following questions. So some traditions you want to keep, some traditions you want to change or skip, your boundaries and scripts. So Kelsey provided some really great scripts there. Which ones felt like you could hear yourself saying that? Which ones did you feel more called to? Or could you create your own? And then my favorite, a small ritual to honor your loss. And then going back to one of the participants mentioned their partner being very supportive. I love hearing that. Now, who's our support person, right? So who is or are our support people or persons? And if we don't feel like we have them, maybe we need to explore who could be. Who could we lean on at this time? Because sometimes we can feel some tunnel vision when it comes to grief and navigating some really heavy emotions, especially when we're someone who doesn't necessarily lean on others. but maybe there are some others in our world that we can lean to more. So we'll give you a few moments. And again, if you wish to chat about it, you're welcome to unmute or add it in the chat. No pressure. This is more for you than for us. Okay, I think, Kelsey, you could probably go on to the next slide. Yeah.
Okay, so just some other takeaways and things to kind of remember as we end our presentation today. So remember to honor those mixed emotions, right? And that duality of emotions, that it's very normal to feel a mixture of joy and sadness and maybe overwhelm and numbness and maybe relief, and just honor that, and realize that that is normal and all of your feelings are valid. Also practicing gentleness and pacing yourself, right? Responding to what you have a capacity for, doing those check-ins with yourself, to see what your capacity levels might be like. And also remembering that all those physical symptoms and those other manifestations that we talked about are very real and again, normal, but frequently check in with yourself over the holidays. Set boundaries as needed, right? Honor your grief process, honor where you are at with your grief process. And remember that grief does not follow a holiday timeline, right? And also just recognize that grief does need community. And we don't say this to to make it seem like we're trying to get you to go to the family gatherings or do all of the celebrations, but rather just remembering that grief does need community sometimes, whether that be reaching out for supports from a therapist. You know, everyone at the team here would be more than happy to support you in your grief, or as Kyla said, identifying a safe person, an anchor of support that you can check in with, someone who will listen without trying to fix, and recognizing that connection, even in small doses, can help grief move rather than harden. And also recognizing that, you know, grief was not meant to be carried alone, right? It is meant to be done with others if we feel like we have the capacity to be able to do that, but honoring where you are at with that. And I
If
think that's it.
Yeah, we'll end on this slide because I
Yeah.
don't think I updated the last slide.
Okay.
So let's just say thank you everyone for joining today. And thank you for those who are going to be watching this recording afterwards as well. We will just say that we love community and grief also exists a lot in communities. So I think it's a really great opportunity to connect with others who are grieving. There's lots of resources for that too, like Bereavement Family Services of Ontario is really great. There's a Kingston location for that. There's also a lot of specific grief supports for pregnancy and infant loss as well, which I think is also another area that we grieve better when we're together in. So just know to if you're not wanting to work with one of us or on our team, reach out. We may be able to re-refer you to other community individuals as well or other community services as well. So that's a big thing. There's also a lot of really great events happening that help us do those ritual pieces or traditions. So on another note, if you're interested in working with us, like Kelsey said, we have a full team, so feel free to reach out. We also host these webinars on a monthly basis, and we're going to be having an option for you to actually sign up for like a newsletter where you'll be able to get access to all of it. So you won't have to like watch for it and register. It'll just be you're automatically registered and it will be sent out to you via email. And if you choose to join, and it feels right for you, that's perfect. And if not, that's fine as well. But we're hoping that that can get the information out a little bit more to you. And on that note, next month, we're actually going to be having Prime Mindset Performance Consulting. So that's Kayla Buck, and she's a certified mental performance consultant. And so I'm really excited about that because it's coming in January too, which is a perfect time for that, for just like a reset for our mindset. Then we also have workshops and groups that we host at our clinic as well. Yeah, so if you have any questions, let us know. I will say join our team too if you provide another holistic service that you feel would complement our team and support our clients. We'd always love to have you. And thank you so much for joining. So I'm going to end the recording now, and we're here if you have any questions afterwards.